The Torah tells us, Book of Exodus, chapter 23, sentence 10. ושש שנים תזרע את ארצך. We are now at the 6th year. Mitzvah Shem, next year will be sabbatical year, Shemitah. So you see soon a lot of application, halachic application to our days. 6 years shall you sow your land and gather in its produce. V'hashvi'it, and in the 7th year, tishmetena, you shall leave it untended, tashta, hefker, unharvest, and the destitute of your people shall eat, and ve'yitram tochal chayat hasadeh, and the wildlife of the field shall eat what is left for them. So ken ta'aseh lecharmecha lezeitecha, so shall you do to your vineyard and your olive grove. So you see a clear command asking us, if you own a land in Eretz Israel, the 7th year, give it away. Now, with that said, we have a lot of halachic implication with that. In particular, when it's come to etrog. What's the issue of etrog? For this upcoming Sukkot holiday, it's not an issue. We are now the 6th year. A person can sell it to you. He picked his etrog and sell it in a market. The following year, meaning when we reach the 8th year, if the etrog was picked after Tu Vishvat, after the beginning of 15 of Shvat, beginning of the year, since it is sabbatical year, it carries a sanctity of the 7th year, and therefore a person not only need to treat it with sanctity, he cannot sell it to you. So the question is, how do we really treat etrog? Why is that? Because we explained in a past couple of days that there are 2 avenues in rabbinic thinking. One is called batar chanata, meaning you go at the time that the process of having a very early stage, but you see a fruit is no longer a little small tiny flower, it's the very early stage of a fruit. That's called chanata. Or batar lekita, the time that the person pick it out. Now, here is the difference. There are certain vegetables that if you leave it longer, like legumes, it can produce good. There are other vegetables, like pepper, if you leave it, it deteriorated. You have to pick it right away on the time. When it's come to trees, again, there are stages. It is a stage, you planted a tree, you water it, and then the next stage is it creates saraf. Saraf is resin, sap, meaning the tree from this point on doesn't need much water, it produces its own capability of new fruits. Versus, for example, a willow tree, arava, that needs all the time water. We ask a question in particular in etrog, because the issue of etrog is, since you need sometimes physical hand way of watering it, meaning artificial watering, it's not enough the way of irrigation. In other words, it's not enough to have a raining water. You need a system of irrigation in order to keep the etrog in the top quality. So how do you treat it? We explained yesterday that the rabbis try to treat etrog as a yerek, as a tree. Now we are on page 15, 11 lines from the top of the page. Be'amina, be'aminei Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yanai, etrog Rosh Hashana shelo mati. Question is, when it's come to etrog, when is the beginning of the year? Amar le'Shvat, the month of Shvat. So he said, Shvat de chodashim or Shvat de tkufa? You mean to say the month of Shvat, you go by the month of Shvat, meaning the lunar month of Shvat, or the Shvat, the solar season?
Right.
So he said, Amar lei de chodashim. I'm going by the months. So the Ramban tells us the source for that is a book of Deuteronomy, chapter 33, sentence 14. The Torah said the blessing of Joseph, Moses blessed Joseph for passing. Blesses, meaning the tribe of Joseph, blessed by Hashem is his land, with the heavenly bounty of dough, and with the deep water crouching below. With, and then they said, with, sentence 14, with the bounty of the sun's crops, and with the bounty of the moon yield. So you derive from that they cycle, the lunar cycle, have some effect on the growth. בעמי רבא מרב נחמן ואמר לרבי יוחנן מרבי ינאי הייתה שנה מעוברת מהו? So what do you do with the leap year? So when exactly the Shvat enter to that domain, since you go by this type of season, אמר לי הלך אחר רוב שנים, go by the majority of the years, meaning even if it's a leap year, the new year of the tree is the month of Shvat. That's what Rashi said. Now, we learn on page 14, Mishnah, both in Tractate Bikurim, at the beginning of Kiddushin, we learn it, that the etrog followed the way of Rabban Gamliel, we do the same as a tree, which is, you have the Orla, you have the 7 years, you have Chanata, and you have Lekita, meaning it's in a practical way we have the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam said that you should mafkir, you should just give away not the land, the produce on the land, and that's the way we are doing in a practical way. The Ramban said lechalot, you have to get rid of it. But anyway, here is the question. Now is the Amoraic question. Amar Rabba, etrog bat shishit, etrog that comes in our year. We are now at the 6th year, so it's a practical halachic question. So it means the chanata, chanata meaning, as we said, the time that the fruit emerges, very early stage, shenichnesa lashvi'it, meaning it entered the 7th domain, 7 years, and now it peaked at the 7th year. P'tura min ha'maaser, so you do not have to give a tithe. Up'tura min ha'bi'ur, since the Torah said that you should get rid of that, so we are exempt from both, from tightening and from expunging it. So the 7th year we understand that is hefker, it's honorless, and is no tithe. And the Torah said whatever left you give to your animals in the field. You remember that? So now the deal is, as long as you have animals in the field, you can keep it in your domain. But after that, you have to get rid of that, either expunging it or give it away, honorless. So he said, Rabbah hold that you go batar chanata, meaning the very early stage when the fruits emerges. Ubat shvi'it shenichnesa lashminit. However, a trog that the chanata, the early emergence, started at 7 and he entered towards to the 8th year, p'tura b'maaser v'chayevet bevi'ur. So it's exempt of tightening, and you have to get rid of it. So it means you go batar chanata. So if it was before Tu Bishvat, it's considered the 2nd year, you need to give maaser ani, the poor people tithe. If it's after Tu Bishvat, it's the 3rd year, you need to give maaser ani, the poor people. So in other words, if the time of that time it's before Tu Bishvat, before the beginning of the year, if it's a 2nd year and it's therefore the 2nd tithe. if it's the after Tu B'Shvat, is the third year, and is a Maaser Ani, is the poor people 5. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, we learn that it's all the same. We go Batar Chanata, the time that the fruit emerges. So now, Amar le Abaye. So Abaye said that this is a contradiction. Why? He said, Bishlama Seifa lechumra. He said, in one hand, Rabbah said, if it was a 6th year, getting to the 7th year, and you go Batar Lekita, the time that you pick it, so it's exempt from Maaser, from the tightening. However, he said that he is exempt from Bi'ur, from getting rid of that. And in the Seifa, he said that you go Batar Chanata, the time that the fruit emerges, and therefore the 7 and 8, it's exempt from Bi'ur. Ela Reisha, so in other words, even Ela Reisha P'tura min HaBi'ur Amai. Why a trog that has this Chanata, the fruit emerges, happen at the 6th year, and it's picked at the 7th year, we say that it's exempt from Bi'ur, from getting rid of that, the Amrinan Zil Batar Chanata, because we said you should go the time of the formation of the fruit, which was the 6th year, which means that without a doubt you go by the time of the formation of the fruit. In that sense, it's the same as a regular tree. Now, Iyache, if that's the case, if you don't treat it as a sabbatical year with the etrog, that chanat that emerges at the 6th year, even if it's not clear, tichayev b'maaser, you should ask, you make it a subject of type, meaning why you exempt the 6th year from tithing. It's not hefker, it's not ownerless. Amar lei, that's what we explained yesterday. Yad hakol memashmeshim ba, ve'atamar tichayev b'maaser. This etrog that emerges at the 6th year and grows during the sabbatical year, it's already a etrog that everyone touching it, which means that you open your field, since you go by the etrog always. But tarchanata, the time that it emerges, if it's etrog, that chanat that came out at the 6th year, and it's picked at the 7th year, it's exempt from bi'ur. So you go batar chanata, which means that that's gidulei shishi, that's the 6th year. But if it's between 7 and 8, so you have to do bi'ur, you have to get rid of that. And because what happened is you give away your property, and people come in and messed up and ruined it, mekalkelim, ruined it, touching all the times those trees. So you treat it as a hefker, as a ownerless, and therefore it's exempt from tightening. Which means, imagine you own a land, it has trees, and the trees have an etrogim, and now it's open for public, and everyone falling around that property. So it's ownerless. So why all of a sudden you need to give tithe for that? Rav Nuna said, Bat shitshit shenichnesa lashvi'it, etrog at the 6th year, you always go batar chanata, okay, the time that it emerges. Le'olam shishit, which means you have to give a tithe, you treat it as the 6th year. It's biblical, it's not hefker. V'rat shvi'it, anichneset l'shminit olam shvi'it. This is a very interesting disputation. It's my tree. and everyone messing up, everyone touching it, okay? So the question is that hefker, is that honorless, or gezer, that they are in a way stealing something? So Rabbah said, that's the disputation between Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna. Rabbah said that it's hefker, it's honorless. Rav Hamnuna said, wait a second, these people may be gazlanim, maybe people who touching and taking incorrectly. Yet those produce needs to give a tithe, because we say that etrog is the same as yerek, the same as regular vegetable, and you grow like regular stam etzim batar chanata, regular trees, you go at the time of the fruit emerges. Meitivei, so we ask in a Braita, now you see Tanaik versus Amoraic. Amoraic was much later. This is a Tanaik. So we challenge what Amoraim, Rava and Rav Hamnuna said by the early Tanaik disputation. Meitivei Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon, אתרוג בת שישית שנכנס לשביעית פטורה מן המעשר ופטורה מן הביאור. If you have an etrog that was growth at the 6th year and entered the 7th year, it's exempt from tightening and exempt from ביאור, from getting rid of that. שאין לך דבר שחי במעשר אלא אם כן גדל בחיוב ונלכד בחיוב. He said, the only time that you have to bring a מעשר, it's something that they collected growth in the time that you have to bring a tithe, and picked the time that need to be. So Tosfot added to that and said, so since this etrog up to the time of pick was not by the owner, because everyone touched it, we treat it as a ownerless, and therefore is exempt from tightening.
Does Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna differ at all, or they view it the same?
No, Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna disputed. It's a moraic. Rabbah said that it's hefker. Rav Hamnuna said that it's not hefker. They are gazlanim. It's a moraic disputation. So Rav Hamnuna said you still need to give tithe for that.
Okay.
So he said ubat shvi'it shenicheset l'shminit, if you have chanata the 7 and lekita the 8. פטורה מן המעשר ופטורה מן הביאור, the exempt from tightening and ביאור and getting rid of that, שאין לך דבר שחי בביאור אלא אם כן גדל בשביעית ונלכד בשביעית. So you have nothing that is subject to the mitzvah of elimination unless it both grow on Shemitah on the sabbatical year and also picked on a sabbatical year. So here you see the reason why Rabbi Shimon gave a reason why it's exempt from bi'ur, from elimination. So he said, Reisha, the beginning, Kashya le Rav Hamnuna. The first clause of the Braita poses his difficulty in regard to opinion of Rav Hamnuna, because he said that the etrog of the 6th year that entered to the 7th year is exempt from tightening and exempt from elimination. Kasha Rav Hamnuna, that he said that this etrog needs to be tightened, because he said we go batar chanata, and this is the 6th year, therefore you have to bring tithe. Seifa, the last clause in the Braita, that if you have an etrog that is in the 7th year that entered the 8th year, is exempt from tightening and exempt from elimination. Kasha ben le-Rabbah ben le-Rav Hamnuna. Why? Because by both of them, you go with the etrog at the time of Chanata, the time that the fruit emerges in regard to sabbatical year, and even in regard to elimination, you go that way. And something that is in a 7 that enter to the 8, you have to eliminate it. Why? Rashi said, because Rav Hamnuna did not dispute it Rabbah only in regard to etrog at the 6th year that entered to the 7th year. So again, you see here a lot of practical halachot, which we'll discuss later, in this upcoming year and 2 years. How do you really treat it? Those etrogim, not so much this year, meaning this upcoming Sukkot, but the following one. So they said Tanaihi is a Tanaic disputation, which means it is true that Rabbi Shimon in the Braita it's different than the ruling of Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna, but you see another source that Rabbi and Rav Hamnuna, the Amoraim, supported, which is, that's the Rashi's way, the Tanya. Amar Rabbi Yossi, listen carefully. Av Tolmos He'id Mishum Chamisha Zkenim. This is the same as Rabban Gamliel Shita 14b. Etrog achar lekitato lemaaser. When it's come to tightening, you go with the etrog, follow the time of its peaking in a matter of tights. V'raboteinu nimnu, and our sages made, like in our simple modern days democracy, they took a vote in a place called Usha. Usha, it was one of the 10 places that the Sanhedrin went to exile because they are forced to leave the Beit HaMikdash. Later in page 31 the Gemara said, so they have the session of the court in a place called Usha. So at that place the sages gathered and they took a vote in this regard. Ve'amru achar lekitato ben lemaaser ben leshvi'it, which means they have a discussion over etrog and they ask when is the proper time, and they said the time of its peaking, that's the proper time both in a matter of tights, in a matter of the sabbatical year. So in other words, we go by the majority, that was the vote taken, and that's the final. So the Gemara said, wait a second. You are now entering to a new question. Shvi'it man dechar shmei. What are you talking about? What mentioned anything about the sabbatical year? Who mentioned that? Because what Avtolmos mentioned, it's he's talking about different things. He doesn't speak about the sabbatical year, because sabbatical year, if you go that way, if you collected it before Tu B'Shvat, it's the 6th. If you collected after Tu B'Shvat, it's the 7th. So what exactly happened at the 8th year? 15b, Chasurei michasra v'hachiktani. So Rashi here elaborate a lot, and he said when you need to determine the year of tightening, we have to differentiate between old and new, that you should not mix between when it's come to Truma. Etrog achar lekitato lemaaser. The etrog you go by the time of picking in a matter of tights. V'achar chanata lashvi'it. And the time of the formation of its fruit in a matter of the sabbatical year. V'raboteinu nimnu be'usha. And our sages gathered the Sanhedrin in Usha, and they rules achar lekitato ben lemaaser ben leshvi'it. The time of picking, regardless to tights, and regardless to the sabbatical year. So here, in conclusion of this part, we have to remember that there are, and I basically based it on the conclusion of the way that Chazon Ish explained it, in 4 different avenues, in this halachic discussion. Number 1, when it's come to etrog, with the year, when it's come with etrog to giving a tights or count the sabbatical year. Let's start with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said in a Mishnah, which we studied yesterday, page 14b, that etrog you go batar chanata, meaning you go in etrog the time that it's the beginning age of the fruits emerges, regardless if it's a sabbatical year or tight. Number 1. Number 2, Raboteinu, our sages, the Sanhedrin in Usha, they hold the opposite. Etrog you go batar lekita, the time that picking. Thank you. Regardless to Shemitah or tithes. That's the second view. Avtolmos, here in the Braita, and Rabban Gamliel, good morning. Rabban Gamliel in the Mishnah that brought earlier, page 14b, differentiate between Shemitah and Maaser, between sabbatical year and tithes. And when it's come to Etrog, you go by the time of Hanata, the emerges in the 7 years. But when it's come to peak, the picking, it's you go for the tithes. Lekita kemaaser. Rabba and Rav Amnuna, it's already Amoraim, they follow the same as Avtolmos, which means they exempt the elimination of a etrog that emerges at the 6th year and peaked at the 7 years, and they require with the etrog that emerges at the 7 and peaked at the 8. The same way they exempt a etrog that emerges at the 7 and collect the 8 from tightening, because when it's come to tightening, you go with the etrog batar lekita, the time of the picking. But since you have the law Shemitah, and therefore it's ownerless, and it's ownerless, you don't have to tithes. So now, if you have an etrog, trace a scenario. We are entering the sabbatical year next year, right? And that etrog, chanat ba shishit, meaning the beginning stage of emergence was a 6 and was picked at the 7. So here Rav Amnuna, who is Amorah, he said you have to bring a tithe because it doesn't carry a sanctity of the sabbatical year, and it's not hefker, it's not ownerless. And Rabbah exempt. Why? Because Rabbah said, look, everybody, you open the field, everybody touching it, it's a hefker. What do you want from him? You want him on the top of that to give a tithe over that? So that's the disputation. There's another view here, what we learn late, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, name of Rabbi Shimon. He held that the sabbatical year, or at least the obligation to eliminate it, it's only applied to etrog that emerges at the 7 and picked at the 7. So you see here how at least 4, or even you say 5 views in regard to this etrog, which has, as we said, a lot of halachic, practical halachic implications since we enter domain of the sabbatical year. But I think in a more practical way, the real challenge will not be on this Yom Tov, and this upcoming Sukkot, but the following year, at the 8th year of the Sukkot. Itma. Rabbi Yochanan וריש לקיש אמרי התרוויו אתרוג בת שישית שנכנסה לשביעית לעולם שישית. What both of them said, you have an etrog in the 6th year, very practical way, which is the year that we are now, enter to the 7th year, so it's obligated to give a tithe because it's a regular, the 6th year, but he's exempt from elimination. Ki ata Ravin, when Ravin came, it's a big halachic authority, he came from Eretz Israel to Babylon. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, אתרוג בת שישית שנכנסה לשביעית אפילו כזית ונעשה כיכר, חייבים עליה משום תבן. Why? Because you go בתר חנתה, when it's come to Shemitah, the sabbatical year, you go by the time the fruit emerges, and since the Chanata took place at the 6th year, so it's not hefker, it's not ownerless, and you need to give a tithe. תנו רבנן אילן שנחתו פירותיו קודם 15 בשבט, מתעשר לשנה שעברה אחר 15 בשבט, מתעשר לשנה הבאה, obviously, okay? Because the beginning of the year is 2 בשבט. So if the Chanata, if the beginning of the fruit emerges, was before 2 בשבט, you treat it as the 6th. So therefore you need to give a tithe. After that, it's a sabbatical year. So they follow the next. אמר רבי נחמיה, במה דברים אומרים מליין שעושה 2 ברכות בשנה? When we go batar chanata, when you go on the time that it emerges, it's applied. Now we juxtapose to another scenario, which is you have a pair of dove. Pair of dove, we said that every month from Nisan they have two small babies, male and female. All right, so that's called brecha. So we usually leave the first one, and then we take from the second and onward. So the Gemara said, "Shtei brechot al kadatach." You mean to say that you talk about a real chick? What this has to do with the trees? Elaima ke'ein shtei brechot. It's like two broods, which means 2 seasons worth of crops, which means you don't collect it in one time. So give me an example. Trace it as in a juxtaposition to a fig tree. What happened to a fig tree? Fig tree, you're collecting the fruits, and then what happened? You come back, is a new one, you're collecting it. New one, you're collecting it. New one, you're collecting it, right? Versus if you have a date tree or olive tree. What do you do with the olive tree? Anyone have the chance to see? I was in Israel in the north. We used to go to a Druze, a village called Mrar, next to our arm base. So we saw the Druze put on the floor, on the grass, a very large blanket, and they shake the olive tree, and all the olives come out, right? Do it one time. In a day tree, the same thing, you collect it one time, you don't go back and forth. But if you have a tree that you collected only one time, for example, a day tree or olive trees, וחרובין, and a curved tree, even the process of emerges took place before the beginning of the year, which is Tu Bishvat. The time of tides is the next year, which means here all of a sudden you see that they go batar lekita, the time of the picking. Now the problem is, the Meiri said, what do you do if it's a mixture between old and new? But we go the psak halacha, the rule. Amar Rabbi Yochanan na'agu aham b'charuvim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan na'agu aham b'charuvim k'Rabbi Nechemia, which means you go when it's come to that as a picking, the time of picking for type. He challenged it from the Mishnah, Tractate Shvi'it, chapter 5. He said, white fig trees, the sabbatical year for them, what do you treat them? So you have the chanata in the sabbatical year. So you treated the second type the same as the second year. And he said, how do you, because what happened is the completion of those trees, of white fig trees, it's in the 3rd year from the time of the chanata. So it means when you're collecting at the 2nd year, it's considering as the sabbatical year, and it carries the sanctity of the sabbatical year. So it means that we go batar chanata, the time of the fruit emerges, even with the tree that their fruits were collected in once. So Ishtik, he basically displayed equanimity. He was acquiesced, he didn't answer. So now we examine why he was quiet. Why he was quiet? So the Ritva said that that's shtika kada. If someone is acquiesced, meaning that he's agreed to what's going on, right? Leima min ala Rabbi Nechemia, but amar li Rabbanan. I'm going to Rabbi Nechemia, and you tell me that you challenge me the Mishnah that follow the sages. Mishum da amar li Shabbat Rabbanan v'avad Rabbi Nechemia. You're going to tell me you have a rule Yachid v'Rabbi Malacha kerabim. When is a disputation between majority and individual, you always go by individual. Now you turn, you say that you, the sages, are majority, and now you follow Rabbi Nechemia that is individual. You tell me that that's the way to do it. Now you tell me say Isu is probably the Amalei במקום Isu כנהגו שבקין עלי. ולמה לקיה מן הלכה מעשה חרובין דרבנן. ואת אמר לי שביעי דאורייתא. Bnot Shuach, it speak about 7. That is Doraita. Doraita meaning is biblical, the sabbatical year. משמט את הכל, it's all make shemitah, and you go by the raita, you go by the time that the fruit emerges, versus Masrot, when it's come to tightening, is only rabbinic. The rabbis can do whatever they want because they invented the whole idea here of the Masrot. אלא מה רבי אבא כהן תמהני מישיבה ריש לקיש מתשובה זו מישיבה או יתווה אלא אין מה היא קיבלה רבי יוחנן ניגו לא קיבלה. So the basic question is, how are you treated? You mean to say that he was quiet because he agreed, he doesn't have an answer, or he hold the same here, that since it's come to a type, that it's rabbinic, you don't need to be stringent, the same as the sabbatical year, that it's biblical. We have a lot of practical halachot, especially at this time, because we are in a way in our 6th year, and next year, Mitzvah Shem, is the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. So as we said, the practical halachot is not so much for this Sukkot, but will be the following Sukkot. So we just touch base, for sure. We need to elaborate on that. The first source I would like to share with you is the Chazon Ish, was based on the Rambam, Hilchot Shemitah v'Yovel, chapter 4. A 6-year etrog, meaning in our year now, we are in a 6th year, that was picked in a sabbatical year, is treated as the 6th-year produce with regard to Maasrot, to tithes, and as the stringency, it is treated as a produce of the sabbatical year as well, since it was picked in a sabbatical year. So now you have an issue. Can you sell those etrogim? So if it was collected at this time, it's one thing. But if it's already go to the Shemitah, the Rambam rules in accordance with the two contradictory opinion, follow the opinion of this attribute Mishnah, and he said that basically we treat it as the sabbatical year, but not everyone hold that way, because the big question is, again, Rosh Hashanah for the trees is Tu B'Shvat. We have the Sukkot, which is before Tu B'Shvat. Yet Sukkot, it's already in a Shemitah year. So for sure people can sell their etrogim that was picked in the 6th year, meaning now. But what do you do with the etrogim? The following. So that's the big discussion. Now, as far as the time of tightening fruits, so the Shulchan Aruch already in 331 said fruit that reaches the point at which it is obligated to tithe before the 15th of Shvat is tightened according to the previous year, even if it's picked only later. But fruits that reach the point after the 15th of Shvat, after Tu B'Shvat, it's tied by the coming year. Now, again, as I keep saying, that we need to ask each and every case differently. For example, when it's come to white figs, so that's the Rambam, Hilchot Shemitah v'Yovel, chapter 4. White figs that were formed in the Shemitah, in the sabbatical year, must be eaten with the Kedushat Shvit, with the sanctity of the sabbatical year produce, even if they were picked only in the 2nd year of the next sabbatical year, because it is they follow the time of formation of the fruits. As we said earlier, takes long time to formulate. So in short, let's wrap it up in a practical manner. This upcoming Sukkot, it's not an issue. You can sell and purchase etrogim because we assume it's the 6th year. The following year, it's a big to-do. I meant because the following year, you have the issue of the Shemitah. So for sure, Kedushat Shvit is not even a question. It's carrying the sanctity of the sabbatical year. But how about selling it? We need to ask and need to search that subject deeper. It's not so simple, because it still have the sanctity of the Shemitah, of the sabbatical year.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai